Welcome back to the channel, ladies and gentlemen. Today, I'm finally going to be dropping the long-awaited What If Deku Had Haki, a video which I'm surprised I haven't done considering just how many My Hero X One Piece videos I've done. I mean, it's actually insane. But after seeing a Kobe edit on TikTok and letting the idea marinate in my head for a while, I started thinking to myself how many similarities there were present between Deku and Kobe. And the more that thought stuck in my head, I just couldn't get it out. I had to pump this video out. So I ended up reaching out to my good buddy Puffinsverse, who just started his own What If channel, link in description. His What Ifs are amazing, genuinely a breath of fresh air to the What If community, considering most of the stuff nowadays is all AI generated. But with all that out of the way, ladies and gentlemen, do all that usual YouTube stuff, like the video, check out my boy Puffin's channels if you guys want to get some more content from him, and enjoy. We begin our story with the beginning of the anime. Izuku would be heading to school, and on his way there would be a massive villain standing in his path. As he would watch, a strange random man with a weird looking quirk would turn to him and say, "Ha, I know what you are, kid. One look at that dopey grin and I know all about you. You're a fanboy." To which Deku would give a smile and then walk away after the incident would have been resolved by Kamui Woods. With that being the case, we would then get a scene of Deku making his way into the classroom as everybody else would be doing the same, and we would zoom in to Katsuki Bakugo in the back of the room, legs kicked up and waiting for the teacher to come in. Once this would happen, we would get the iconic "I know you want me hero" scene from the teacher. To which after this would happen, we would get the moment in which Deku would be bullied and pretty much belittled by Bakugo in front of the whole class. After this happens, Deku and the rest of the class would end up leaving the classroom, or technically not Deku considering he's the last one to leave, but as Izuku would be putting his stuff away back into his bag, Bakugo coming over to him like in the original story would throw the book out of his hand and blow it up, throwing it out of the window. After this, he tells the poor kid to pretty much throw himself off the building and hope that in his next life he'll have some sort of quirk. In this moment, Deku turning to Bakugo's direction, rage filling his heart, would look at him as he would say, "Ugh!" But before he could say anything, Bakugo's explosion hand would be glaring at Deku, as Deku staring at this would quickly calm down immediately. However, in that moment, Bakugo would have felt a slight shiver going down his spine, wondering the heck that was about. But regardless, he would let Deku off the hook for today, and as Izuku would be leaving his school, he would grab his notebook, making his way towards the alleyway that he normally would have taken. Once there, Deku would end up walking there going, "Ah ha ha ha," laughing, trying to shrug off all the emotions he was feeling. But as this would be taking place, suddenly from behind, a manhole cover would end up being opened, as out of nowhere would come the sludge villain, who instantly rushing at the kid's body would say, "Ha, finally, now the cops are gonna get off of my tail," since in this timeline, All Might isn't gonna be the hero actually chasing him, and instead, it was the cops and a couple of pro heroes. The villain would tell Izuku, "You know what, kid? You're a real hero to me at least," as he would begin taking over Izuku's body. However, before the process could be completed, out of nowhere, you could see an old man munching on an apple who would be staring at the situation as he's like, "Villains, they never change, do they?" As he would go on to essentially use his Conqueror's Haki on the villain, causing it to instantly fall unconscious, not having noticed that Izuku was there as well. So in a moment, realizing that he was there as well, Garp would actually rush over to the unconscious boy and would start pretty much hitting his chest. 1, 2, 3. After the third blow, Deku would start coughing out bits and pieces of the sludge villain, as Garp would say, "You okay, kid?" Deku looking to Garp would say, "Ah, who are you?" To which Garp would say, "Name's Garp, kid. I'm a retired hero. You should be thanking me. I saved you from that little cruddy villain." To which Deku staring at Garp would say, You were a hero?" He would say, I've never heard of you though. What's your quirk?" The second that Garp hears that, he would say, "You're a strange one, aren't you, kid? You wake up after being attacked by a villain and the first thing you ask is my quirk? Well, I guess there's no point in hiding it. My name is Garp, and my quirk, well, I don't really have one of those." Deku hearing that would say, "What? You defeated that villain though. I felt a strange pressure. When you arrived, it was almost as though you were looking deep into my soul. I couldn't even stay unconscious. How could something like that not be a quirk?" Garp would say, "Kid, what you felt in that moment was Haki, and it's not something that I feel like getting into detail with, considering no one else but me seems to be able to use." As he would begin walking off, but Deku stopping him would say, wait, I need to thank you." But in reality, all Deku wanted to do was ask him a question. And as Garp turned around, he would say, well, you already thanked me, kid, so there's no need for more. Deku suddenly would look down at the ground going, is it possible to become a hero even if I don't have a quirk? To which Garp, stopping, would look at the direction of Izuku and seeing him, instead of giving him the All Might reaction of quirkless, he would kind of just look back and just straight up start laughing in Deku's face. He's like, what? You become a hero? Kid, there's no way you could become a hero. I mean, if you've taken a look in the mirror, you're scrawny, you're short, and to top it all off, you're even quirkless. There's no way that in this superhuman society you'll ever be able to become a hero. In fact, I think that's one of the funniest things I've heard all day. He would begin laughing right in Deku's face, to which Deku, seeing that, would kind of look down feeling extremely embarrassed at the fact that a hero, or at least a retired one, had just told him that he had no business even dreaming about becoming a hero. But in this moment, Deku would do something that would change the course of his life forever. Instead of just staying looking down and letting Garp walk away, he would squeeze his fist and say, even if you don't believe I can become a hero, and the rest of the world doesn't think so either, I'm either gonna become a hero or die trying, because that's what I wanna be, and someday I will be a hero. In this moment, Deku, as he would have been saying that, would have actually released a small amount of Haki, so faint that if this were to be anybody else but Garp, they never in a million years would have sensed it. But Garp, taking note that Deku seemed to have just displayed the ability he can wield, would actually end up grabbing Deku by the collar and saying, all right, kid, come with me. Taking him by the collar, he would begin dragging him away, to which Deku would say, what, huh? Where are you taking me? And Garp would say, you wanted to become a hero, right? As he would smile at the direction of Deku, to which he would say, yeah, but that doesn't mean you get to kidnap me. Garp would say, you'll be fine. I'm just gonna train you for a couple of months. Months? I can't just leave out of nowhere for a couple of months. What will my mom say? What about school? Put me down. Garp, looking at Deku, would say, guess you're a little stronger than I thought, but it's gonna take a lot more than that if you're gonna want to stop what I'm about to do to you. As he would throw Deku over his shoulder, knocking him out, and a few hours later, Deku would actually wake up in a random forest, if not, we could call it a jungle. As the second that Deku would look around, he would begin looking at things and say, where am I? As grabbing at his head, he would think, that hurts so bad. All of a sudden, you would pretty much end up seeing Garp coming in, as he would go on to tell the boy that he wanted to become a hero, right? And if he really wants to make that happen, then for the next 10 months, he's gonna train his butt off and then take the recommendation exam, entrance exam. That said, Deku, hearing that, would say, but my mom, school. Garp would go on to pretty much explain that he took care of those things. He went through his belongings, saw his ID, and ended up pretty much making a call to his mother. He'd then go on to laugh and tell Izuku that she wasn't on board with anything either, but it's not like she could stop him. As he would begin laughing, and Deku would say, Mom, you... But in an instant, Garp would go on to punch Deku square on the top of the head, leaving a massive bump that would glow red anime style on Deku's head, as he would pretty much turn to Garp. And after this would happen, Deku would go on to spend the next 10 months beginning to learn Rokushiki techniques and the very basics of armament Haki. Over this course in time, Deku would undergo the Garp training that Kobe would have done in the original, including his extra training that would have led Kobe to getting even stronger than Helmeppo, and that really is the reason why I used Kobe for the thumbnail, considering that I was gonna maybe use like Garp or something like that, but I was like, nah. Deku reminds me so much of Kobe that I just couldn't help myself but making the thumbnail pink, which, I mean, come on now, y'all can't tell me it doesn't look sick. But anyways, regardless of that, over the course of the next 10 months, I'm going to be making it so that Deku would get about as strong as Kobe does during the time when he ends up meeting Luffy at the Water 7 stuff. When Garp and them all end up getting acquainted, and Luffy ends up getting shocked by Kobe's ability to use the Rokushiki techniques. Because with 10 months, considering that in the actual anime of One Piece, Kobe, who had no devil fruit, who had basically no Haki, and was practically a nobody, was able to learn all of those skills in what felt like, 3 months, if maybe not less time than that? There's just no way in the world that I don't see that Deku working his butt off even harder than he would have done so when he was doing his All Might training wouldn't have mastered every Rokushiki technique within 10 months, including the basics of armament Haki. So at this point, Deku had the innate ability to cover his fists with Haki and punch straight through objects, much like some of the hardest hitters in the One Piece verse could do. And this is going to be helping him a ton when it comes to the entrance exam, because Deku has unlocked every Rokushiki technique, which, just going off of the top of what these abilities actually allow him to do, there's the one called Shave, which pretty much allows him to move at superhuman speeds. There's Iron Body, which is essentially what the name sounds like. It's a defensive technique, or technically speaking a durability one, that allows Deku to turn his body into a solid piece of iron. So if you were to land an attack on him, you might even end up hurting yourself. There's also a Moonwalk, and then there's that Tempest Kick technique, as well as I believe 2 others, which at the moment I'm forgetting, so we're gonna leave those options blank. You guys could comment them down below and I'll probably end up pinning you for the help. But anyways, after the training would finally be over, Deku and Garp would have actually ended up creating a really good bond with each other and having an incredible relationship up to this point. With that being said, Deku, after the 10 months would be over, would finally return home, with Garp dropping him off at his doorstep personally. Leaving Deku there, he would end up pretty much greeting Inko, saying, "Ah, you must be Midoriya," as she would go on to say, "My baby!" and jump on Izuku, tears sprouting from her eyes, as she would go on to pretty much like look at Garp and with anger would actually like slap him, completely out of character for Inko. But with this slap landing, Inko would have actually ended up hurting her own hand, not because he would have used Iron Body or anything like that, but the dude is just that durable. So after landing the slap, he would say, "Nice to meet you too, ma'am," walking in saying that he really did a number on her son, saying that that little weakling of hers is no longer even recognizable. Her looking at Izuku would realize that Deku grew so much, and she'd be like, "What? Did your training make my boy grow as well?" Garp would say, "More of a side effect of the training. He's become a man," as he would smack Deku on the back, going on to explain that he's an old-timer hero, as he had told her in the phone call about 10 months ago, going on to explain that he saw potential inside the boy, and because of that led him to train the kid. He would go on to explain to her that ever since he retired from being a hero and heroism started being boring because he was just that strong, nothing in his life really felt like it gave him purpose. So it was kind of just going by day to day until one day he ran into her son. He would go on to explain that he thinks that he has even more potential than him, as he would look at Izuku telling him not to get too bored of all this hero work, saying that one day he'll even surpass himself. Izuku, hearing these words from Garp, would be stunned, being like, "Did you really think that?" To which Garp would start laughing, even though he really did mean them, and start acting like he was joking. After this happens, Izuku would go on to pretty much spend the rest of the day with his mother, as they go out to eat, and Garp would actually just tell Izuku to just shoot him a text. Oh, also, not to get soft on him because training is going to continue tomorrow. He would text Izuku an address telling him to meet him there, as for the following week before the actual entrance exam would happen, Deku would continue training with Garp every single day. And mind you, it's not like this is something that would be over once he finishes training time skip. No, he's going to continue training with Garp every single day, just like Kobe would. So with that said, I think it's fair enough to jump into the entrance exam. That said, the entrance exam would all take off, and as Izuku would be dropped off at the school by Inko, he would look around at the building thinking, "This thing's massive. I've only seen pictures of this, but wow." Walking inside, he wouldn't trip, meaning no Uraraka encounter, and once inside, I just don't see Deku still having that muttering habit, thanks to having that thing completely beat out of him, literally, by Garp. That said, Deku would go on to take the written exam, and seeing as he had primarily been focused on his body training and not exactly mental training for school, I could see Deku barely scraping by with like a 70% on his test. However, that's not where Deku's gonna shine in this timeline. It's actually gonna happen during the robot portion, or the practical exam. The second that Deku would be given a number and told to go outside, Deku would do just that. As he and a group of guys would begin waiting, suddenly, President Mike would come over the intercoms going, "Go, go, go, there's no countdowns in a real battle." So as everybody else would blitz to the direction of all the robots, and people would already have a lead on Deku, Deku instantly, using his Rokushiki technique Shave, would speed blitz before all of them, yes, including Ida, and absolutely decimate 3 robots with the fighting style that he would have learned from Garp. After this, Deku would proceed to rush at the direction of the top of one of the buildings using his moonwalk ability, but actually hiding it a bit, jumping from wall to wall to wall to wall, making it seem as though he still doesn't have that power. Then, out of nowhere, Deku spotting a huge clump of villains, or robots technically, he would lunge towards them as instantly using a combination of Shave and Tempest Kick would actually throw a massive attack at them that would take out a horde of robots. After this, a singular three-pointer would appear behind Deku as throwing a punch, Deku last second would avoid it by using his paper technique, which essentially allows him to move in a fluid motion to attack most, if not all, attacks. After doing so, Deku would land a counter punch on the robot, punching a hole straight through it, as at this moment we would get a bit of an intermission with everybody watching Deku's display of, well, abilities, to put it lightly. Everybody would be shocked, with people wondering what Izuku's quirk is. It'd be at this moment that Nezu would go on to explain to everybody that his file actually says he's quirkless. People watching this would be like, what? Quirkless? There's no way the kid's quirkless. But as they would continue watching, Nezu, seeing the boy fighting, would think, those movements, it reminds me exactly of that old hero. As he would then begin thinking of Garp, remembering what it was like when he was a pro hero back in his day, as he would continue watching Deku, who would maul through robots, till suddenly the zero pointer would finally come out. With that being the case, Deku, seeing it from a distance, knowing that it offers 0 points to him, would kind of just ignore it. But that's when Deku would overhear a scream, and it would be none other than Uraraka. To which Deku, hearing this, not being able to just ignore the screams of a person crying for help, would instantly, using Shave, speed blitz to Uraraka's aid, throwing the rock that would be covering her leg in that moment. As picking her up, he would use his technique to get her out of the way. Deku in this timeline, I just don't see him trying to show off some flashy move, instead quickly and efficiently saving Uraraka. All the while the 0 pointer's foot would have been coming down, Deku would have taken her to safety as he would ask her if she's okay. She would pretty much look at him and go, I am. As Deku would say, alright, good, can you walk on your own? He would try to help her put pressure on her foot, but she would be like, it actually hurts. Deku at this point would help her over to Recovery Girl, and from that point forward, he would stop getting any more robot points, opting to actually take care of Uraraka, instead of even focusing on his own test. Uraraka, making note of this, would say, why don't you leave me here? Don't you have to take your own test? But Izuku, looking at her, would say that the best part of being a hero is the rescuing someone part, and all that other stuff doesn't really matter. Plus, he thinks he already passed, having already acquired, like 70 something robot points after a devastating performance against all those robots, or maybe even like 80 or 90. But what Deku doesn't know is that in that moment, the show of heroism and act that he just took of sacrificing the test in order to actually help someone else out would have actually earned him a mind-boggling 100 rescue points, having carried out the rescue operation practically perfectly. This would ultimately impress the heroes, and eventually we would pretty much just jump to the first day of UA, with Deku continuing his training and catching up with his mother over the course of this time. Once he would find himself at the UA classroom, Deku, taking a step inside, would be greeted to Bakugo, who he would have hoped might not have been in his class, but it is what it is. Deku walking inside would have a glare from Bakugo instantly, to which Deku would just ignore it, walking to the back of the class and taking a seat next to some random girl. In that moment, Uraraka, walking inside, would say, oh hey, it's you, going over towards Izuku saying, thank you so much for saving me. As Izuku would smile at her, saying it was no big deal. She would go on to ask Izuku if his hair is naturally that color or he dyed it. Deku, looking at her, would smile, saying that it actually is that color, since in this timeline, because Deku's so similar to Kobe, come on, I just had to give Deku the iconic pink hair. Come on, like I had to. So yeah, Deku with his little pink hair, and like he does look like Deku obviously, he would kind of just smile, and as the two of them would be talking, all of a sudden we would pretty much get Aizawa stepping up as he would go on to tell the two of them, if you're just here to make friends, then I suggest the two of you leave my class immediately. This is a hero course. Now throw these on and meet me outside. After him saying this, all the students would quickly go quiet, realizing that they probably shouldn't just be wasting time talking. And so, the students would all meet Aizawa outside as he would toss a ball to Izuku, who, grabbing it, would ask what he's supposed to do with this. Aizawa would go on to explain to Izuku that he needs to throw it as far as possible. So, Deku closing his eyes and gripping the ball would think back to every single night that he trained, every punch that he would have thrown against that massive tree in the forest that he would have been training with, every time that an animal had beat him up for being too weak. Deku feeling all of the training, all of the tears, all of the sweat, all of the blood, squeezing the ball in his hand would actually cause it to pop. As Deku seeing this would be like, sorry about that. He would go on to ask for another ball as he would tightly squeeze his grip on it, reel his arm back, and throw it as far as possible. This would end up landing Izuku a grand total of 800 something meters, as Aizawa watching that display of power would be stunned going, he really is quirkless. Having used this quirk on Deku at the last second to test if Deku's strength really does come from himself or if he has some sort of enhancement quirk. But in that moment, Aizawa would have been shocked to find that those records listing him as quirkless would have actually been true. This would leave him to closely watch Izuku during the rest of the test, which would actually go by incredibly fast, but after that display of power, Bakugo would rush to the direction of Izuku going, "Damn it, Deku! How did you get so strong?" Rushing towards him trying to land an explosion, but before this could happen, Bakugo would be restrained by Aizawa, who using his scarf in tandem with his erasure quirk would tell him, "One more of those and I'll expel you." Bakugo hearing that would instantly realize that he couldn't just attack Deku like he would at middle school, as he would back off, and in this moment Bakugo would have taken note of one thing. Deku didn't even flinch when he had rushed at him or tried to attack him. This would lead Bakugo to having a flashback to the other time that he had tried to attack Izuku, with him thinking back to the moment when the both of them were allowed to go into UA after having received their acceptance letters. Bakugo and Deku would have both been summoned to the middle school, with Izuku and Bakugo both being praised, the teacher essentially telling them that he's so proud that two of their students are going to be admitted into the UA hero course. And after that would happen, much like in the original, Bakugo would have pretty much taken Deku to an alleyway trying to question him. But in this moment, as Bakugo looked at Deku's eyes, he didn't see the eyes of a scared boy who felt powerless. Instead, he saw the eyes of somebody who saw them as equals, and as he would try to question Deku, Deku would tell him that he's not scared of him and he's definitely not going to be apologizing. Deku would say, "You know, Bakugo, all this time you've been a bully to me, but that's done. I'm not going to apologize for having gotten to UA because I earned my spot. And if you think that you're still going to be using me as your punching bag, well, you've got another thing coming." As he would push right through Bakugo, and Bakugo being completely too stunned to speak would just look at Deku, rage filling his eyes as he would think, "I'm gonna kill that kid." Suddenly, he would flash back to the real world, as after this would happen, we would get the remaining tests, the 50-meter dash. Deku would quickly use Shave to blitz through that event, the grip strength. Deku would mark an impressive score, beating even the likes of Arms, standing long jump. Deku would use a quick version of Moonwalk, or a lesser version technically, to clear the entire box. After the repeated side-to-side steps, Deku would once again use Shave to clear that as well, getting an impressive score. And over the ball throw, well, you already know that. Push-ups, sit-ups, and toe touches would be next, and after all that would finally be said and done, Deku would actually end up racking up first place, beating out Momo Yaoyorozu in this timeline due to him getting incredible scores at every single test that they took, with the Rokushiki techniques having helped Deku out greatly. That said, Deku, after all this would be said and done, would be rushed at by the students of UA who would all congratulate him, with even Momo stepping up to the plate saying that she's impressed, saying that she honestly thought she would have won if not for Deku being there. Deku would, be smiling, having a good time with his classmates, as turning over to Bakugo, seeing that his entire world was crumbling before his eyes, would feel a bit bad, but what's he gonna do, apologize for getting strong, for all the training that he himself put himself through? There's no way he was gonna do that. That's when he would look at his phone and see a message from Garp, telling him to meet him at the same spot. So, Deku arriving at Dagoma Beach would continue his usual training, getting stronger and stronger and working on his armament haki to the point where now Deku could fully use armament haki through both of his fists at perfect efficiency. All Deku needed to learn now was to actually implement it on a defensive scale. But regardless of that, eventually time would pass, leading us to the 2v2 battles, to which All Might bursting through the classroom going, "I am here!" coming in through the door like a normal person, would stun everyone, including Izuku, who, remember, All Might is still his biggest hero, so Deku seeing All Might for the first time in class would go crazy, leaving everybody to stare at him as they're all like, "Whoa dude, chill, it's All Might, we get it, but damn." To which Deku, who's literally crying in that moment, just shocked at the presence of All Might, would stop, be like, sorry? This is when Deku would kind of snap out of it, having reverted to his former state for just a second, as he would then get serious once more, and finally, all of them would be told that they're going to be receiving their hero costumes. With that being the case, Deku would then go on to be handed a marine little outfit, the same one that Kobe would use in One Piece, as that's the outfit that Garp would have ended up pretty much sending to the agency to request for Deku as his hero costume, telling him that until his training's done, he's going to be using this marine outfit. So Deku putting it on would meet everyone outside who was all like, whoa, that's a pretty snazzy outfit, but aren't you afraid it's going to get a bit dirty? Isn't white a bit of a bad costume decision? But Deku, looking at his outfit, would actually say that this outfit actually means everything to him. He would go on to explain that if it wasn't for this outfit, he wouldn't be here. Everybody hearing that would be like confused, but what Deku really had meant was that if it wasn't for the person who made him that outfit, he would never be standing here, feeling as though he was an equal with some of the nation's best of the best students. That said, eventually All Might would go on to explain the rules of the 2v2 battles as people would begin drawing lots, and much like in the normal story, Deku and Bakugo would be faced off against each other. Bakugo realizing this would turn to Deku trying to intimidate him, but as Deku looked at him, he would just smile, pretty much telling them to do their best. Bakugo seeing this would writhe with rage as he would slap Deku's hand out of his face, telling him that inside, he'll kill him. Deku hearing those words would actually be taken aback a little, thinking that Bakugo never will change. He would then realize that this is going to be his chance to show Bakugo that he's no longer the weak kid he could just crush whenever he feels like it. Now, they're equals, if not rivals, Deku would think. But as those words would leave his lips, Uraraka hearing that would go, "What? Did you just say rivals?" She would say, "Oh, this is a battle between fated rivals, isn't it? That's why he's always so mean to you guys. I'm pretty sure that you've known him your whole life, and he's probably just mean to you because he's never liked the fact that you always beat him at everything." Deku looking at Uraraka would actually say, "That's not true. When I was young, I was actually the weakest person ever. In fact, he actually used to bully me a little bit ago." Uraraka hearing that would be like, "What? There's no way." And Izuku turning towards her would say, "But not anymore. Today, I'm gonna show Kachan that I'm no longer gonna be his punching bag." To which Uraraka hearing this would be like, "All right, well, I'll help you with whatever you need." And so the battle would begin. Deku and Uraraka would head inside of the battle chamber, as once inside, Deku would turn to Uraraka, going on to explain that knowing Bakugo, he's probably going to try to go for a frontal assault, so she should try to stay behind him to avoid any damage from his explosion quirk. He would explain to her that knowing him, he'll also definitely start everything off with a big right hook, trying to inflict as much damage as possible. Uraraka hearing that would go, "Whoa, that isn't very heroic." But as Deku would look at Uraraka, he would say, "But it is efficient," as the second that they would turn the corner, Deku would get a bad feeling. And his feeling would be right on the money, as a big right hand would be rushing at the direction of Deku's face with a hand gauntlet looking like a bomb or grenade. Deku would weave out of the way, grabbing onto his arm and quickly throwing Bakugo to the other side of the corridor. Bakugo, once landing, would end up saying, "So, looks like that strength of yours isn't just for show. Let's see how well you can use it in real combat. Come at me, Deku!" Deku at hearing this would tell Uraraka to run. She would do just that, and the second she would go away, Bakugo would say, "What? You think you're gonna defend your little teammate? Once I'm done with you, I'm gonna wipe the floor with her just from association." As Deku, knowing what's next, would quickly use the iron body technique, knowing that if he was to start off with this and demoralize Bakugo with his strongest explosion, that would instantly give him an amp in the mental department of this fight, considering that Bakugo will probably be too stunned at the fact that his explosion did nothing to him. So, as Izuku would have Bakugo rushing at him, he would tank an explosion point blank to the face, as Bakugo would smirk, but the second that the smoke would clear and Deku would be standing there having taken no impact, Bakugo would be like, "What?" Suddenly, Deku would instantly rush to the direction of Bakugo, landing a punch right on his stomach, sending him into the air, as simultaneously, Deku would land a tempest kick on Bakugo's face, drawing a ton of blood out of him as he would be sent crashing into a wall on the other side of the wall. In this moment, Bakugo would look up as he would feel his jaw having been heavily impacted by that blow. He would say, "How the hell did you get so damn strong?" And looking at the direction of Deku, he would say, "Tell me!" To which Deku, looking at Bakugo, would tell him that he trained. Bakugo hearing this would say, Don't give me that garbage. There's no amount of training that could bring a weakling like you and make you any stronger. He would then tell Deku, you think these gauntlets are for show? As he would pull the pin, and all of a sudden a massive explosion would be sent at Deku's direction. Simultaneously, you would hear All Might on the speakers going, Katsuki, no, that'll kill him. But Bakugo would say, no it won't, as the explosion would fill the entire corridor and Deku would once again be standing there, having tanked the entire attack using Iron Body. In tandem with his armament Haki, Deku would have put two arms out in front of him, tanking the brunt of the explosion. As Deku's body would be standing there, his outfit having been torn to shreds, he would look at Bakugo, who would stare at him go, there's no way. Bakugo would be too shocked to move, as Deku would use his Rokushiki techniques, appearing in front of him, then fading, then appearing once again, fading and appearing, looking like he's body flickering to him, before all of a sudden being right under him and charging up the meanest uppercut. Deku would then go on to land this attack on Bakugo, which would cause him to fly into the air, drawing tons of blood out and knocking out a few teeth, with Bakugo being knocked out unconscious. In this moment, Deku, with his outfit completely torn, would leave out a yell to Uraraka saying, Uraraka, it's safe to come out now. And after a couple seconds would have passed, she would run out going, are you? But seeing Deku's ripped body would cause Uraraka to start blushing like crazy as she would say, Izuku, your shirt. But Deku, noticing that, would be like, oh, sorry about that. He would like cover himself up with his hand as they rushed to the direction of Ida's bomb room, and then the two of them would pretty much just tag team Ida, catching him off guard with a pretty simple strategy and then winning the 2v2 battle event. After this would happen, everybody impressed with Deku's performance out there would be like, whoa, that's incredible, as Izuku would begin to be praised by everybody, all the while Bakugo would actually start to be reprimanded by not only Recovery Girl, but All Might, Aizawa, and the rest of UA staff. With the event finally being over, Deku would go over to check on Bakugo to see how he was doing, knowing that he might have taken things a bit too far, considering that he let his emotions get in the way of the fight. But as he would walk inside, Bakugo would say, get lost, you damn Deku, with Deku stepping out knowing that Bakugo definitely doesn't want to hear anything from him. So, arriving to the Dagoma beach, he would continue his training with Garp until eventually the USJ day would come around. Deku on this day would end up arriving to the school with tons of bandages on from him doing his intense training with Garp, as everybody looking at Izuku would say, whoa dude, what happened? It looks like a train ran over you. Deku, looking at the students, would say, oh yeah, I guess I might have overdone it a bit with training yesterday. The students looking at Izuku would say, you think? Just look at yourself, man. I don't even think you should make it to the USJ. But Deku, having his bandaged arms, let's say, nah, I'll be fine, I'm used to it. He would then think back to all the times that he had trained in this state, if not worse, as he would have a smile on his face, knowing that it is what it is. If he wants to become a hero, competent to stand on the level of all his classmates, then he has to train 200 times stronger, because he's not gifted or special like them. Instead, all his strength comes from pure hard work. Well, at least everything to this point, because from this point forward, he's definitely going to start getting some crazy Haki powers. That said though, let me know what you guys think of this story down below in the comments, considering it's not like I'm the only one working on it. Puffin's verse was helping me out with this a lot, so go check his channel out after you guys hear his part, and also comment down below any honest suggestions that you guys have for him and some critiques to help my boy improve. Also, leave some for me as well, seeing as your boy wants to get better also. But with my yap session being over, let's actually get into the USJ. The event would all start off with the students arriving there to see 13 beginning to give a speech, when all of a sudden, Kurogiri would arrive. He would make his introduction as multiple villains would begin to be warp gated into the USJ, and Izuku, seeing this happening, would instantly opt to use his shave ability in tandem with Moonwalk to rush at Kurogiri to try to land a kick. But before he could do this, he would be warp gated away, as opening his eyes, Deku would see water. Instantly closing his mouth and holding his breath, Deku would look around only to see a shark villain rushing him. The second this would happen, Deku, having trained with Garp for situations just like this, would reel his fist back, as throwing a punch so powerful this would create shockwaves in the current. Not crazy, but like pretty, like decent shockwaves. This would actually startle the villain and send him flying away even in the water, as the rest of the villains seeing this would be stunned. Suddenly, 4 more villains would all rush at Deku from different angles, and Deku, quickly thinking of a smart method, would use Iron Body, tanking all the attacks before then rushing at them and landing a blow. This is when finally the 6th villain would step up, trying to use his water quirk to manipulate the waves and injure Deku. But before this attack could land, Deku, who had been running out of air, would suddenly be saved by Tsuyu, who, grabbing him with her tongue, would proceed to throw him up onto the boat. Deku in this moment would begin coughing. Thanks, Tsuyu. As water would start coming out of Deku's mouth, she would say, "Whoa, I didn't know you could fight villains in the water, Izuku." With Izuku turning to Tsuyu saying, "You know, I did a bit of training for that a little bit ago." As Tsuyu, hearing that, would end up saying that it's impressive. Deku, turning to Mineta, would ask what his quirk is, as he would go on to start crying, being like, "Pop off?" Deku, hearing that, would tell Mineta to stay up here, as turning to Tsuyu, who would say he's gonna need some backup. So, the rest of them jumping down would proceed to solo the rest of the villains, with Tsuyu kind of just serving as backup, helping Deku to catch his breath whenever he needs it, using her tongue to throw Deku out of the water for small spurts in time for Deku to come out and start breathing. This would ultimately lead to about 4 minutes passing as every single one of the villains would be taken out, and as this would be happening and the final villain would be hit by Deku, Deku would start feeling the panic of his classmates. The fear of Kaminari, Momo, and Jiro would overtake him. The anguish of Aoyama feeling terrified. And the rest of his classmates, which were still by 13's side, having watched her be destroyed by Kurogiri's quirk, would all hit him at once. Deku, feeling all the panic and fear of his classmates, would wonder what this feeling is, being a moment similar to when Kobe would have actually felt the anguish and pain of the Marines at the Marineford arc. This would lead Izuku to finishing off the villain, as he would suddenly begin hearing Aizawa's voice, who in this moment would be panicking, feeling the strength of the Nomu even without its quirk activated, noting that this thing was as strong as All Might. This realization would instantly send a shiver down Izuku's spine, as hearing that he would think, All Might, there's no way. But being unable to run away or simply ignore Aizawa, Deku would rush to the direction of Aizawa. Being a few meters away from him, he would stop just short, as he could hear Aizawa in his mind saying, "Stay away, kid," as he would not say it out loud, but he would just be staring at Izuku, pretty much with his eyes begging him to run. But Izuku, hearing that and feeling all of the overflood of emotions that were going through him, he would instantly scream, "Stop it!" as an overwhelming flow of Conqueror's Haki would actually fill the entire area. This energy wave would actually go on to knock out both villains and heroes, with Shigaraki, Kurogiri, and the Nomu being the only 3 standing at this point. A ton of students who didn't have the wills to remain standing would be knocked out, and students like that would be Mineta, Koda, Tsuyu, maybe even Uraraka, Jiro, Momo. All the characters who don't have a very, very strong will and don't have confidence in themselves would quickly pass out, as Deku would begin to rush to the direction of the Nomu, who Shigaraki, seeing Izuku having just arrived and having actually made him feel a bit of fear in that moment, would have an angry growl on his face, as he would turn to the Nomu and say, "Nomu, kill the brat, handle Aizawa after." In this moment, the Nomu would look up at Izuku as it would screech, then rushing at Deku's direction would throw a punch, which Deku, coating his fist in armament Haki, would then throw his own blow, feeling fear, not knowing what was going to happen when their fists clashed. But as this would happen, the blows would actually equal each other out, as Izuku, being stunned at the strength that he was able to display in this moment, would be going equal with the Nomu, stunning Izuku at the fact that he could even contend with this thing, and definitely shocking Shigaraki, who, seeing this happen in real time, would begin to get pissed. Then Deku, using all of the techniques that he's learned to this point, would begin facing off against the Nomu. He would use his paper technique to dodge tons of blows from the Nomu, having the same control of the ability as that one really fat villain with the weird looking mouth. He, fighting against the Nomu, would dodge most of the attacks, but quickly Deku would go on to realize that none of his punches were doing anything. Even his armament coated full power blows were barely scratching at the Nomu. The shock absorption truly was bothersome, and as Izuku continued fighting the Nomu, the situation would begin to get more and more desperate. Eventually, Izuku wouldn't be able to keep up as well, and the Nomu would finally be able to land a blow on Izuku. This would send Deku crashing into the ground, as the Nomu, chasing after him, would once again try to land another blow. But in this instant, Deku, using observation Haki for the second time in the series, would feel the blow coming, moving out of the way, then throwing his most powerful blow possible, using an extremely watered down version of Honesty Impact. The blow would hit the Nomu and instantly shockwaves would be felt, as the Nomu itself would go flying out of the USJ, with Conqueror's Haki shooting off of Deku as he would stare at the direction of Shigaraki, fully unconscious in this moment, not even in control of his own body. He would stare at him as he would aim his fist at his direction, and Shigaraki, feeling fear in this moment, would fall down to the ground, as suddenly a portal would show up underneath him, warping him away, with Shigaraki staring at Izuku in this moment with nothing but hatred in his eyes. He would think, "I'll kill you, you damn brat." And as Shigaraki would be arriving at the bar, he would then hear the voice of his master, All for One. After that would be over, Deku standing there would actually fall unconscious onto the ground, as Aizawa, going over towards Izuku, crawling to him more specifically, would ask him if he's okay, to which suddenly All Might, finally arriving, would pick the boy up and take him to Recovery Girl. He would then help anybody out with any remaining villains that didn't get knocked out by Izuku's Conqueror's Haki, and after this would finally be said and done, we would get a scene of Deku and Garp beginning to talk, with Deku explaining to Garp what had happened in that moment, and Garp thinking, "Interesting, so you used a version of observation Haki, and I'm pretty sure you even finally awakened it, Conqueror's Haki." He would go on to explain to Izuku that over the next week, he was going to be focusing on observation Haki, considering that the little runt definitely wasn't ready for Conquerors. So, over the course of the next week off that the students would have, Garp would blindfold Izuku, and Deku wouldn't be going home until he had mastered observation Haki. He would use a rod to try to hit Deku over and over and over again, until Izuku would finally be able to read his attacks and dodge. This would finally happen, but after Deku would have tanked so much damage, he would look as though he had just went through an entire tsunami, if not a hurricane or something. That said, the week would finally be over, and after his training with Garp would be done, Deku's new grasp on observation Haki would be incredible, him being able to use it at the same level that Luffy had after the 3-year time skip. After this would happen, we would then get the events of the sports festival playing out, as Deku would be told that he's going to be the one to actually give the speech, so Deku, doing so, would make his way to the podium, tapping on the mic going, hello? My name's Izuku Midoriya, and, well, I'm a student at UA. He would start kind of botching the presentation for a second, and as everybody would go quiet, they would start thinking that this speech was lame. Suddenly, Deku would steal his resolve and begin to give one of the most inspiring speeches of all time, along the lines of, "If I could make it here, and I'm standing here in front of you all, then anybody can. If anybody has a dream to become a hero, then reach for the stars and go plus ultra." After saying that, everyone just starts going crazy. Deku's speech would start getting clipped all over the place, and it has like little TikTok edit music. Is this like mundo, dum 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 dum? Like, I don't know, it's just so dumb. But the point is, the dude gets clipped and he goes viral. First event would finally come around, and it would be none other than the race. As soon as this would begin, much like in the original, Todoroki would attempt to use his ice to freeze everyone, but Deku, using observation Haki, knowing that that was coming, would quickly blitz forth before the ice could even touch him, and going faster than anybody could perceive him, he would use Shave to appear in places for small spurts, appearing, then disappearing, appearing, then disappearing. After a few short minutes, Deku would find himself at the front of the race, about to cross the finish line, as everybody else would be far behind Izuku, and he would be the one to win the race, using his technique, Shave. Garp, watching this in the stands, would have a huge smile on his face, thinking, "The kid's definitely got some chutzpah." As after this, Deku would then go on to take the next event, which would be the cavalry battle, which we're completely going to skip because I don't care about it, and following that, we would get the 1v1 battle versus Shinso, where the only interesting thing to happen here would actually be kind of a big deal, considering that once Shinso would trap Izuku in his mind control quirk, which I can definitely see happening, Deku's will to not lose this battle as soon as he feels himself start to walk off the arena would force himself to snap out of Shinso's mind control using nothing but sheer will, as sparks of Conqueror's Haki would be shot off of Izuku, and in this moment, everyone in the stands would start to be knocked out, considering that they're just basic civilians. Hundreds of people would start falling unconscious, as people would start wondering what the heck's going on, with the staff being the only one knowing what's happening. Deku in this moment would have actually knocked Shinso out himself, as Midnight, being a pro hero, would have been able to stand the massive amount of Conqueror's Haki that would have been shooting out of Deku. Now obviously, if this was in One Piece and Deku was really using like the full brunt force of Haki, there's no way that any one of these pro heroes, with the exception of maybe All Might, would be able to stand, but we're kind of weakening his Haki, because I mean, he has Conqueror's Haki, but at the end of the day, he did just awaken it, so it's not that crazy strong. Right now, it's still basically just knocking out weak people with very, very minimal wills. So with that being said, Deku would move on to his next battle, which would actually be against Todoroki, and this would be an interesting one, because Deku, now having access to his observation Haki, would look at Todoroki, who would step onto the ring with his icy stare. As the second that the match would be announced, Deku would see instantly what Todoroki would do, and it wouldn't have been too far off to what Deku would have predicted. Todoroki would have started the battle by freezing the entire arena, leaving Deku absolutely zero spaces to run off to before he would have been frozen. So Deku, knowing that that was going to happen, would in an instant coat his entire body in armament Haki, and through nothing but his sheer will, using his Haki once more, forcing himself to do it, would actually begin shattering the ice. As Midnight would prepare to say that Todoroki's the winner, the ice would start breaking, much like Garp would have done when his battle against Akiji. And so, as the ice would begin shattering, Deku, instantly blitzing forth to the direction of Todoroki, would go to land a blow on him. But before the punch could actually connect, Todoroki's fire side would go off of pure instinct. But Izuku, who was already rushing at him in the zone, would not care about this at all. Reeling his arm back, he would punch Todoroki square in the stomach, as his punch would end up going out throughout the entire arena, and it would send Todoroki crashing into the wall, indenting him into it, with Todoroki fully unconscious, as he would drop onto the ground completely out of it. In that moment, Deku, standing there with his fist, would stare at it, as he would also fall to the ground, having gone unconscious thanks to the power outputage that he would have just displayed. With that being the case, Deku being announced the winner would have shocked Garp, who, seeing Deku not only use Conqueror's Haki once but twice in this battle, would be stunned at the control that the kid, though his Conqueror's Haki was weak and not properly used, he unlocked it way sooner than he thought he would have. So, as Deku would begin to prepare for his third battle against Bakugo, Garp would actually go over towards Izuku, telling him to try to take this kid out without using any Haki, meaning no armament and no conquerors. Izuku, hearing that, would tell him that he can do that, but why? Garp would tell him that he wants to see if he's able to handle these kids without using those abilities that he has. As he would walk off, wishing him good luck, and Izuku, watching Garp walk away, would say, "Wait, no, I have..." But before he could even finish his statement, Garp would have already left, and as Izuku would try to chase Garp, he would actually run into Endeavor, who, seeing Izuku, would think, "Damn, he's much scarier in person." Endeavor, turning towards Izuku, would say, "So, you're the kid who took out my Shoto. Well, know this, hero. Never again will that happen. I'm gonna train that boy till he collapses, and he won't be losing to you again. You got it?" After Izuku would hear that, he would have a bit of a sweat drop going down his face, as he would laugh and be like, "Huh, okay, sure. The number 2 hero's after my blood. Isn't that great?" With that being the case, Deku would then see Bakugo come up from behind, as with nothing but a cold, icy glare, he would walk right by him. No threats, no dumb outbursts, he's just locked in. The battle would commence, and as Deku would stare at Bakugo, Bakugo would shoot up into the air thinking, "Last time he defeated me because we were in close quarters combat and my explosions couldn't do a thing. But how's this?" He would shoot an AP shot at Deku, but Deku would already be moved out of the way. Using Moonwalk to appear in the sky with Bakugo, he would throw a punch at Bakugo's direction, who, tanking the blow, knowing what it felt like, would grit his teeth going through it. Shooting an explosion at Deku, who, because he was in the air, he couldn't use Iron Body at the moment, so this would actually cause some damage on him. And so Deku and Bakugo would go at it in the air, with Deku using nothing but his Rokushiki techniques to land attacks on Bakugo. He would finally end up throwing a massive Tempest kick at his direction, sending Bakugo to the ground. Bakugo from there would begin shooting a ton of explosions, creating a smoke screen, and since Deku wasn't allowed to use observation Haki, Bakugo, using this to his advantage, would go to throw an explosion at the back of his head. Deku in this moment would be caught off guard as the look in his eye would change and Deku would all of a sudden lock in. His movements would begin more sharp as he would begin weaving and dodging, ultimately uppercutting Bakugo into the air, who now up there using his explosions to create even more distance between the two of them would prepare an AP shot, shooting it at the direction of Deku, who, seeing it through the smoke, using observation Haki accidentally, would punch at the explosion, destroying it with his Haki covered fist. After this, he would lunge at Bakugo using Moonwalk, as he would then proceed to use another Tempest kick on Bakugo, knocking him down to the ground as he would weakly begin standing up, and Deku, seeing this display of just unshakable will, would be thrown a bit off guard. Seeing Bakugo standing there who was practically already unconscious, Izuku would walk over towards him, as in this moment, using observation Haki, he would know that Bakugo would have tried to use one last attempt to take him out, because in that moment Deku was actually going to go and extend his hand out to Bakugo, telling him good match, but thanks to his observation Haki, he would be able to dodge the blow that Bakugo was gonna throw, simply punching him in the stomach, as Bakugo would fall unconscious in his arm and fall to the ground. Everybody watching this would see their champion having won, with the crowd going nuts, and Present Mic revealing that the brat was completely quirkless. Everyone would be stunned, going, what? A quirkless kid shouldn't be able to fly or punch that hard or move like that. Everyone would start debating whether this was true, and some people, posts on Reddit would go viral, would go on to say that he fights really similar to an old hero back in the day, who supposedly was also quirkless, but it was never confirmed. But people would start talking about the fact that Deku's file really does show he's quirkless, and so this would become a huge point of conversation over the next few days. All of a sudden, we would time skip to Deku finding himself in class, with the pro hero Midnight walking in, as she would go on to explain that today they're picking their hero names. Deku, hearing that, would go on to think, what should my hero name be? When suddenly it would hit him, the fist hero, Kobe. Just because I kind of want to pay a bit of homage to the actual character we're basing Deku off in this timeline, I decided to give him that hero name. But if you guys have a better one in the comments, feel free to comment it down. Anyways, when it comes to the internship opportunity that Deku was going to be taking, I could see him either A, going with Gran Torino because All Might might be able to actually potentially ask Deku to be a successor, but the option that we're going to be going with is going to be Deku just simply going with Garp. He still has his hero license after all, and he's been the one responsible for training him this whole time, so there's no real reason for Deku to all of a sudden go seek some other mentor when Garp's been the one helping him out this whole time. So Deku would go mentor with Garp himself, and he would be with the old fist hero, seeing as that's what his name is based off of, and he would begin training with Garp. Ultimately, this would mean that there would be no Stain situation, and with Deku not there to protect Ida from himself, this means that Ida would either be paralyzed, taken out of commission, or killed. And because I don't want to take things to the extreme in this timeline, let's say that Ida simply would become paralyzed after his encounter with Stain. That said, another change that I could see happening in this timeline is that due to there being no Izuku, there would not be that whole clip of Stain going viral, leading to Dabi, Toga, and Spinner joining the League of Villains. Now, because I keep having this happen where they never join, this greatly impacts the story, so for plot purposes, we're going to be saying that those members of the League of Villains would still end up joining them. So, Stain or no Stain, they still go to the League of Villains. But ladies and gentlemen, that's where I'm going to be handing the mic over to my boy, Puffinsverse. He's an incredible content creator who I found out of nowhere when I was looking for some what ifs to binge myself, seeing as, hey, it's not like I only make these videos, I also really enjoy watching them, but unfortunately, there's nothing but garbage text-to-speech AI filth that I don't exactly feel like watching. So when I saw this dude's channel, it was nothing but a breath of fresh air for me. And seeing that, I started watching the dude's videos and loving them. I asked him if he wanted to collab, and he said yeah, so here he is. And I hope you guys go on to enjoy his section of the video as much as I enjoyed it, because I know I sure did. That said, give a really warm welcome and consider checking his videos out. It won't take you much time, and he has an incredible selection of videos. So after you guys are done with the video, let me know what you guys think about him down below in the comments. And with that said, it's been your boy Xehther, and I'm signing out. Peace.
Damn straight, Xehther. Those text-to-speech bots can rot for all I care. Anyways, what's good? Let me cook on this one. Give a brother some faith. Also, just heads up, I wrote this a little bit before Xehther sent me his part, but it all lines up anyway. Hope you enjoy. Now, Deku would just be chilling in his class. His hands still hurt a little bit from training, but he could feel himself getting stronger. He's taken off guard by Aizawa bursting through the door, looking around the class as they kinda mourn Ida. Though he didn't die, he still hurt bad. But I'm just gonna ignore that. I don't want to be a downer. He would then explain to the entire class that they have their finals coming up, and it's time to dictate who can come to the upcoming training camp. Everyone's kind of excited by this, Deku in his head trying to imagine what they would be like, the bell cutting him off as he goes out to lunch. Now, for the next week or so, the class will be given time to straight up just train or study. People going to Momo's for their study session. Deku though isn't worried about that. He was smart already, and well, he's gotten this far by not studying, so what's the harm doing it one more time? Instead, he goes to talk to Nezu, asking and pleading with him to be able to train with Garp once more. I know there's been a lot of training in this what if, but you know, just give me some faith. Nezu, after seeing this, would allow it, giving Deku a special form to give to Aizawa before he's sent on his way. Deku straight away running out of school makes his way to their training ground, this time in the forest. Deku makes his way there immediately and is greeted by a smack to the head by Garp. Why the hell didn't you tell me you could use Conqueror's Haki? Deku's confused, asking what that even is. Garp kinda spaces out. Oh yeah, I didn't tell you. They sit down over some tea and he begins to explain it. He first noticed him talking about it during the USJ attack. What he explained was Conqueror's Haki, but he didn't think a shrimp like him could use it, so he pushed it aside. Until the sports festival, where he watched it with his own two eyes, seeing people dropping like flies around him. So for the next week, that's exactly what they would focus on. Both being natural Conqueror's Haki users would make it much easier. At the end of the week, Garp looks at his student, remembering the small brittle kid he was when he trained him. Deku's silhouette in the sunlight as he walks off, now with a different aura about him. He would make it to school once more after his week of training. Hand clenched tight with bandages, wrapped, a huge smile on his face as he walked back inside. Met with everyone reading through their old notes trying to cram pre-exam. Completely forgetting to study, Deku shrugs it off. Sitting the theory exam and somehow passing. I mean, like, they were fighting in the office when they were marking his exam. He would then make it to his practical site, walking in with his hero outfit, looking clean, as they would explain the matchups. Deku sits kind of excited listening to the matchups. Todoroki and Momo versus Aizawa, Sero and Mineta versus Midnight. This is until he feels something. His observation Haki kicking in instantly as he looks up, All Might already mid-fall. Slamming down to the floor in front of them, smile on face with a serious look in his eye. Aizawa then explains his matchup, Bakugo and Deku versus All Might. Deku's grin turns into a full smile, as does Bakugo's. They look at each other. As much as I'd love to say they're still beefing, I feel like both of them wouldn't want to give up this opportunity, based on some grudge. Sitting and watching the rest of the matches, the two of them low-key speak. Deku apologizing for the sports festival before making a truce with Bakugo, just for today. They walk onto the grounds, cocky as hell. Deku holding his arm to the front of him, cracking his neck and walking down the main road. Bakugo starts talking. When he comes here, I'm gonna blow... He's cut off by Deku, whose observation kicked in. Roll right, quick! Bakugo's eyes open a little bit as he sees the onslaught of air rushing towards them. The road peels up, buildings crumple. Bakugo blasts an explosion and peels himself into an alleyway. He watches on as where he was standing gets completely destroyed. A nervous grin creeps on both of their faces. Deku in the alleyway across from him points in All Might's direction, sensing his power from a mile away, before nodding to Bakugo, who nods back. Deku closes his eyes, locking in on All Might's position as he makes his move. He lifts his hand above his head, putting 3 fingers up. 3, 2, 1. He opens his eyes and they both rush out of the alleyway, watching All Might run past him as they smack him from both sides. Bakugo using a full power explosion and Deku smacking him straight with armament Haki. All Might's caught off guard by this but still manages to tank it, sending a punch at both of them which Deku actually slips. Bakugo being sent flying backwards but catching himself midair, watching as Deku grows a full smile once more. You don't scare me, All Might. I've met far worse. He thinks back to all the clobberings he's gotten, the bruises he's gotten even when using armament. Garp was on another level. His Conqueror's Haki spikes around him, lightning pouring out of him and crackling to the ground around him, shooting in all directions. All Might watches on in amazement. He could feel Deku's presence, an almost primal urge to run in the back of his mind. He pushed it down as a smile crept across his face. They rush in and meet in the middle, slamming each other in the chin on some Aokiji and Garp timing. Haki sparks shoot from the impact site, All Might's fist hurting from Deku's armament. They both shoot backwards into buildings, completely destroying them in the process. All Might begins laughing. Not bad, but today I'm a villain. It's going to take more than that to put me down. Deku flicks a piece of rubble off of himself, shooting it at All Might. Heh, I could say the same thing. Bakugo from the sideline smirks. Now was his chance. He aims up at All Might and pulls the pin, his gauntlets completely full. All Might tanks this head on, not expecting it. Deku's little show of power taking his attention away. Deku looks at Bakugo. Shit, nice shot. You trying to finish this? Bakugo laughs a little bit. If you can keep up, nerd. Deku gets up from the floor and looks down the road. All Might was already coming his direction. Pause. Once again he sparks up, this time with armament Haki, closing his eyes and feeling it flowing around his fist. He opens his eyes, Haki cackling the air around him as Bakugo readies his second gauntlet. Plus, a huge regular explosion. All Might flying at the two of them is met by a bright light. Deku punching the air in front of him and Bakugo exploding at the exact same time. The air in front of the two of them cracks, the sky above them splitting as the attack is launched. All Might can do nothing but watch on as the force of the two attacks slams into him. He coughs up blood before getting sent straight into his Small Might form. Deku using his observation sees his outline, his life force draining to that of an old man's. His eyes go wide as he rushes forward, using Shave and Moonwalk to catch him midair, hiding him in an alleyway before the dust clears, saving his public image just in time. The two of them are announced the winners, the class in shock at what just happened. Did they just beat All Might? Where even was he? And where did they go? Deku and Bakugo are in the alleyway talking to All Might, asking him what's up. Did they just punch the quirk out of him? All Might laughs a little bit before explaining his injury to them and admitting defeat. They end up walking out of the alleyway after calling Nezu to pick up All Might, before running to the finish line. Due to this, both of them end up making it to the forest training camp without having to do some secondary classes. They make their way to the bus and begin their drive straight to the training camp. Like in canon, they would stop at the top, everyone kinda confused, hopping off the bus and looking around. Deku, sensing an attack coming, jumps out of the way using Moonwalk, straight up dodging the mudslide that the hero pushed them off with. Aizawa watching this is low-key impressed. Deku's senses were sharp as ever. Though, that was still cheating, so, instead of making him go through the forest like the rest of the class, Deku was straight up told he would be dragging the bus behind him, like they used him as a horse, pretty much. Turning the bus off and sitting inside as Deku dragged it behind him. They end up making it to camp 30 minutes before the rest of the class does. Deku dying as the class arrived. They all complain that Deku cheated, which Aizawa gets a good kick at. They eat like kings and sleep the first night off, their second day rolling around as training starts. Now, Deku's trained with a Garp his whole life. So, doing some push-ups and sit-ups is not going to do anything. He starts thinking of training he could do, watching all the other kids training to their max. He thinks a little bit more before thinking back to his training with a Garp, his time spent in the forest, and how his Haki blossomed. Explaining his training with a Garp to Aizawa, who after some convincing lets him go wild. From the first day on, Deku walks into the forest, not to be seen. In the forest, Deku would be jumped while he slept, by those dirt monsters which the teachers sent in there. Being kept on constant alarm as he trained deep in the forest, practicing imbuing his Haki on stuff like trees and even practicing his Conqueror's Haki on some animals with quirks. Ending up, after a solid 2 days, the king of that forest. He'd finally begin making his way back on the third and final night, just before the class began their haunted forest walk. Deku using Moonwalk would fly just above the tree line, making his way back to where he sensed the rest of the class until he felt something. A bloodlust. A villain. Deku looked around, locking in on a figure's aura hiding behind a rock. He sensed someone else. A small kid. Someone sitting alone on the mountainside eating his dinner. Deku's eyes widen as he rushes using Shave and Moonwalk together. He makes it there as Muscular begins buffing up. Deku sweeping in and grabbing Koda, jumping into the air and floating using Moonwalk. He stares down on Muscular, who finally came forth. He looks at Deku, floating ominously in front of him. Who the hell? Wait, it's you. Yeah, you're the one from the sports festival, aren't you, kid? You're the main target. He covers himself in muscles and jumps right at Deku and Koda. Deku would look at Koda smiling, already sensing the attack coming. It's okay. Hold on tight, okay? Koda does so and Deku spins midair, sending his leg out and slicing through the air in front of him. The slice hits Muscular, leaving a huge gash. Deku using Moonwalk starts running right at him, getting quicker and quicker before letting off some Conqueror's Haki. Now, who sent you? He does a flip and sends a kick slamming down on Muscular's shoulders, foot coated with armament Haki, slamming him down to the floor and retracting his muscles. Muscular feels a pain like he's never felt before, his muscles inside of him vibrating and torn from the impact as Deku slowly floats down. He puts Kota down and walks straight forward, walking Muscular down, his eyes looking almost villainous. Conqueror's Haki cackles around him in all directions. Now, are you going to speak to me, old man? Muscular's eyes twitch open, shock going down his spine. His mind is flooded with impulse to run, but before he can even speak, he's completely knocked out. Deku's Haki and beatdown being way too much to handle. Deku shakes his head out of it, looking back at Kota who is still scared. Sorry about that. I didn't know what took over me just then. He scratches the back of his neck before nodding. Okay, come with me. He grabs Kota and once more starts flying, this time off in the direction of the cats, feeling more than just their presence in the forest, looking around and seeing smoke beginning to form below him. He closes his eyes and moves. 1, 2, no, 10 of them. He looks around at each of their locations. He finally makes it to the cats, slowing down right above them and slowly falling. Teach, there's 9 villains on the loose. Can you use your quirk to warn the others? I'm off again. Apparently I'm a target. I'd rather you not get involved, so I'm gonna dip. The teacher looks up at Deku before looking at Kota, who was weirdly calm. He saw Deku's strength and confidence. The teacher nods before telling the 2 classes and the teachers about the villains. Deku flies off once more, this time with a serious look on his face. He locates the first lot of villains, Twice and Darby. Deku sweeping in from the top would send a Tempest Kick right at them. The Tempest Kick goes right through Darby as he melts to mud right next to him. Deku was kinda confused by this. A clone? He sweeps down and kicks Twice. Twice is sent flying backwards, slamming into a tree and breaking his arm. He looks down at it before looking at Deku. I yield! Deku looks confused, watching as Twice begins to straight up tweak over his arm, cursing him out for killing him, wasting his last chance of life. This is until he doesn't disappear. Like in canon, Twice finally awakens. Knowing for certain he wasn't just a clone, he begins spamming clones like nothing else. The rest of the villains and the teachers straight away notice a huge explosion in the distance, watching on as a single figure floats above the tree line, an army of villains appearing below him. Deku looks on in horror, Twice sending clones out in legitimately every direction. He couldn't handle this. What should he do? They were after him, right? Deku thinks quickly, launching himself down, coating his fist in Haki and slamming it into the floor. The clones around him disintegrate as he locks onto the real one. Wait, I yield too! Twice looks up at him, his clones pausing mid-fight to see Deku with his hands up. In his head, Deku thinks of his classmates. The teachers around him. Surely if he was a target, he could bargain. He slowly approaches Twice and begins talking. So, who are you after? If it's just me, then let's leave. No need to get messy. Twice and his clones begin speaking around him, each one of them having a different conversation before the main one speaks up. We were after you and Bakugo, but I guess we could deal with just one of you, right? All of his clones look around and nod to each other, Twice pulling a phone up and calling Korigiri, who picks up and teleports the rest of the Vanguard squad to them. Surrounding Deku, Korigiri deciding it was worth their time just to take him. So that is exactly what happens. Deku getting captured by the League instead of Bakugo. Mind you, this all happened within 2 minutes. The heroes, after hearing the huge explosion and seeing the smoke, would understand the message Deku left for them, straight away telling the kids to protect themselves and searching the area. This timeline and not finding a single trace. Aizawa is especially worried about this. He knows for certain Deku wouldn't lie about something like this, and Kota backs his story up. After a search all night, including the police and the local heroes, Deku is nowhere to be seen. And due to Momo and the class not being involved, they have gotten no leads. Immediately, the media begins clapping back at UA, Inko going on record and crying on TV, asking for her son's whereabouts. The pro heroes desperately try and save the public image. Having seen the story on the news, Garp immediately jumps into action, making his way to UA and reprimanding them before rushing straight out. Garp knows his student, and using that, I'm going to say his observation Haki is so in tune that he can sense him, even ever so slightly. Now, unlike the heroes in the main story, there is zero plan. Garp isn't that type. All he did was tell them which direction he was going, rushing over to the bar by himself, smiling the whole way, confident in his student's abilities, yet slightly nervous. He had a bad feeling about this. Deku sits in the League's hideout, tied down to the chair like Bakugo was, surrounded by every villain in the League all at once. Shigaraki scratches his neck. Who knew you were such a big player? The news is going crazy over your capture. Deku smirks a little bit. The news? You think the news is your biggest issue here? Shigaraki drops his grin, walking over to Deku. He places 4 fingers on his neck, dangling the 5th closer and closer before pulling back once more. All for One comes over the intercom. Now, Shigaraki. Let's not be hasty. You yourself said he was a key player of your plan. Shigaraki looks back at the monitor on some master stuff, on some weird shit. Listening to All for One speak as Deku watches on. For once, he was honestly scared. A little bit of his pre-Garp side coming out. The voice the man had, something was off about it. He could just tell he was powerful. A shiver went down his spine. He remembers the situation he's in. He had to play it cool. He's distracted by the news flicking on, watching the heroes on the TV fighting the press over the situation he'd put himself into. He starts to think about Garp, how he trained him, what he would do in this situation. Thinking further and further back, all of his time training, all the strength he's worked so hard for. He sees Garp in his head. He wouldn't give up in this situation. If he was him, If he was here right now, he'd kick the hell out of all of them. Deku clenches his fist hard. He starts building up Haki in his arms, finally feeling he could beat all of the villains around him. Until someone else arrives. Korigiri opening a portal right next to him as Deku turns to see it. His observation Haki straight away going crazy, feeling almost disgust as the man walked through it. He feels a pressure on his chest. He couldn't swallow. He couldn't breathe. He watched the man walk into the room. So, you're the one Shigaraki's been talking about. The one who beat the Nomu. All for One stares at Deku, his face disfigured, eyes non-existent. Guess they weren't lying. You really don't have a quirk, do you? Shigaraki looks at Deku. Not a quirk? Yes he does, Master. I saw it myself. All for One laughs a little bit. So you're his student, huh? Before the Age of All Might, there was only one man I ever feared. Just as he says this, Deku feels a second presence. Unlike All for One, it's opening and warm. Both powers make his observation go haywire. Stuck between 2 immovable objects, he feels someone coming. Someone quicker and stronger than he's ever seen. His eyes grow wide, snapping his head to the left to see a familiar figure in the distance. Hey, you damn villains! His cape blowing in the wind, standing atop a building, Conqueror's Haki blasting away at the floor below him. Deku could feel his presence from here, like it was right next to him. Shigaraki stares Garp down. Who the hell are you? Garp, without even responding, jumps into the air around him getting cold and thick as he clenches his hand. Laughing the entire way up, his Haki burns bright in the sky. Red and black streaks of lightning lighting up the area around him. The air whistles past him as he gains distance. Garp starts laughing like a villain, the air crackling around him as he pulls his fist back. A helicopter looms overhead with a single reporter, broadcasting it, watching on as the sky burned a permanent red. People tuned in from all over. They could only sit and watch. No one spoke. The world went silent. Deku on the chair stares up at Garp, his teacher, doing exactly what he envisioned him doing in his head. He didn't think he was worth this much. He was just a quirkless kid. Garp laughs louder. Who do you think you've kidnapped? The villains at the base begin freaking out. Who the hell was this guy? He came solo? All for One, though, is impressed, clapping. I see you've still got it, old man. Watching as Garp burns bright. All for One begins muttering to himself, sticking his hand out as Garp lunges closer. Quirk booster times 4, shield quirk times 3, iron-like bones times 2, his arm contorting and growing in size, shield after shield surrounding the league as Garp finally throws his fist forward. Straight away the floor around them and the force field melts, disintegrating into dust around them, pushed down by nothing but force. Haki slices through the earth, most of the villains being knocked out by this alone. Deku stares up at his teacher. He couldn't sit and do nothing anymore. Haki rains down on the bar from above, All for One barely able to keep his shield up. Watching as everyone around him passes out, he sticks his second hand out, using forced quirk activation on Korigiri below them to get them out of there. Deku falls down into a portal, looking around at the change of scenery. He was surrounded once more, but this time everyone was knocked out. Only Shigaraki stood. Thinking quickly, Deku breaks himself free, flooding his shackles with armament Haki and destroying them from the inside. He airwalks up to the sky, not even fighting Shigaraki. He knew that the other villain was bad news. He couldn't just leave his teacher all alone like that. Sensing both of them out there, he starts booking it over, not letting anything else distract him. He watches as sparks of Haki fly around the battlefield around a mile away, running as quick as possible. Garp sits in a close 1v1 with All for One. Though he can't steal his power, as it's not a quirk, he can injure him. You two are the only people I'm disgusted by in this society. You pick fights with me, yet you're quirkless. All for One summons a knife quirk, slamming it into Garp's side. Using a quirk that makes his attacks untraceable, he coughs a little bit of blood before counter-attacking. Deku senses him from ages away, feeling their presence clash, their raw emotions in the battle. He feels his Haki flowing unstable. Was he doubting his teacher? Deku clenches his fist as he flies closer and closer, starting to emanate Garp's move, climbing higher and higher into the air as his fist and body start glowing bright and green with Haki. Finally, seeing the two of them on the floor, Deku starts falling. Much like Kobe in the anime, he starts flailing around, his Haki still shaky and uncertain. Memories start flooding his mind, all the training he's done with him. He starts thinking of his life without Garp. None of this would have happened. He wouldn't have been a hero. He wouldn't have been strong. He clenches it harder, pulling back and flowing Haki in. Conqueror's Haki begins flooding out of him. Much like Garp, the air around him cracks and gets heavy. An injured and tired All For One stares up at him. He sees the same image of a young Garp flying at him. Garp from below stares on, laughing and pointing, coughing up a little bit of blood after the one-on-one. Get him, kid. Deku hearing this feels certain, flowing every bit of will he had into his fist and slamming it forward. All For One puts both hands out, summoning any defensive quirk he had, but it was too late. Deku piles on every ounce of Haki he can muster, slamming the air and everything below him with an insane attack. The floor below him crackles into hundreds of pieces, his Conqueror's Haki running wild, slicing through buildings around him. The ground within a mile radius shakes as his attack connects. All For One feels this, feeling the force atop him. All of the nullification and painkiller quirks he had active begin misfiring, the Haki hurting him unlike anything he's ever felt before. He begins shaking, legs crumpling down as the force becomes too much for him. He desperately tries to hold on, but it's not enough. All For One is slammed into the floor, getting sent flying deep underground and falling into a pit of straight up lava, much like Kaido and Big Mom. Deku from there looks at the sky around him, his goggles flapping in the wind as he free falls. The helicopter shaky and turbulent. He stares at the sky around him, the heavens themselves parting, shining light onto him. The helicopter gets a good look at him, the crowd around the world all breaking their silence to cheer for Deku and Garp. The teachers and the press conference thankful he was found, and his classmates thankful he was alive. Him and Garp would eventually get picked up and taken to the hospital, getting checked out and eventually dismissed. The heroes following Garp catch up and the rest of the villains are apprehended, having already been knocked out by the Conqueror's Haki. Garp, although he was injured, is still alive, though it's finally time to call it quits. He retires and that's pretty much the end of the story. All Might and his successor take care of Overhaul, like let's be real. He gets his hero license very easily, like you've seen everything he can do. And with no League of Villains, there would be no End War. Sorry if this was a little bit short, or written a little bit weird if I'm being honest. I just kind of found a groove and, went with it. Hope you enjoyed, and thank you to Xehther for having me on. It has genuinely been a huge honor. Thank you for listening, and catch ya.
Hey, you made it to the end of the video! Like it or die!
That wasn't the line, Kachan!
Whatever!